Mirror Business FM, The Morning Drive. Geopolitical tensions rippling through global aviation. Private jet operators, on the other hand, seeing a sharp spike in demand, with commercial routes disrupted and uncertainty surrounding major air corridors. More travellers are turning to private aviation because it's obviously more flexible. There are the security bonuses, I suppose, and of course the reliability. So to look at what's driving the surge, how the private aviation sector is responding, whether this is a shift that could perhaps reshape premium travel even after the current crisis subsides. We're joined by Tom Hill, who's the Director of Group Charter Travel at the private jet charter provider Fly Victor. Tom, thank you for coming on this morning.
Good morning, Tim. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. Look, I've read of a 19% increase in private jet departures to Europe since February the 28th. Is that accurate is one part of my first question to you. And just how significant, if you can more broadly give us an idea of the significance of this surge in private flight demand and how it's been since, obviously, we've seen tensions escalate.
Yeah, definitely. So just on your first point, I think that's probably around accurate. In terms of the amount of requests Victor have had, we've seen around a 500% increase in requests if you look at the same period in 2025. So it's certainly been a busy time, and a lot of people are kind of calling in, messaging us because they want to have an idea of, can they get an aircraft? What sort of lead time are we looking at? Should there be, cancellations or anything like that with scheduled service flights?
So what are the main, this seems like an obvious question, but there is a point to it, bear with me. What are the main reasons that clients are shifting from commercial to private charter now? I mean, if you have to be somewhere, you have to be somewhere, but there's also the point that this is not really the switch to luxury, is it? It kind of mirrors the scale of the commercial disruption that we've seen.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say the main driver has been kind of having that backup plan in place. So a lot of the demand we're having at the moment, especially on the group charter side, is corporations who have staff all over the region and they just need a backup plan. So for all kind of service continuation from their side, that if they need to relocate a team so they can keep working, that's been a significant driver. But it is that flexibility, as you said before. It's not necessarily everyone wants to rush out on a luxury aircraft. It's knowing that they can get from A to B, because naturally there's been service disruption with the scheduled airlines. So that's where kind of flat private aviation comes into its own. It gives that flexibility, and it means that if a flight is cancelled, scheduled flight or disrupted, they have that kind of option to lean back on a private jet if required. As you can appreciate, these large commercial airlines they've had a surge in demand, but also there's a lot, they're focusing on key trunk routes where they can focus on getting people out. So private aviation gives that flexibility to say, right, we can get to this airport this time. But that said, Tim, there are still, like commercial airlines, there's still a lot of operational variables in the private jet world, because these variables affect commercial airlines and private airlines. So, for example, if airspace might temporarily close, airports might close with short notice. This could be 30 minutes or a few hours. We have things like the permit lead time, so we can't just fly a jet straight away. We need to probably position one in mainly from Europe, and these permits for certain countries in the region can take several days in a kind of normal circumstance to obtain. But the CAAs have been working to fast track these applications to make sure we can move these groups at relatively short notice. But we've been advising clients that the lead time for charter flights, a sensible lead time, is between 36 and 48 hours. So it means they can get where they need to be, and in the background we can get all the operational side in place, whether that's positioning the aircraft down to the region or getting the permits in place to operate the flight.
Okay, and it's such an unusual time, isn't it? And we've got this backlog of passengers. Dubai, in particular, of course, is a hub, a commercial aviation hub, and that backlog is huge. So new bookings are virtually impossible. There is obviously a waiting list, let's put it that way. So private charter comes in there as well.
Yeah, exactly. And to your point, it's not necessarily just this region, it can be all across an airline's network. So we've seen a spike in demand from also places like Egypt. We've operated flights from the Middle East as well to move passengers who have kind of had schedules affected. So it is a global impact, if you like, on people.
Um, If you can reach neutral hubs, or I use that under advisement with the old speech marks, of course, like Istanbul or Athens, or I suppose Cairo as well, then people are using private charters to reconnect with the commercial network. Is that one of the ways it works?
That's exactly right. So we've had a lot of flights operating from places or to places like Athens and from places like Cairo, because this is where scheduled and private can work complementary, where if we can get them to a hub airport, there's a lot of passengers who are in the US, for example, then we had a charter flight from Cairo to the US. So we had 250 people taken from Cairo back to the US. So you're kind of seeing both sides of the industry really working together to help people get to where they need to be.
I'm interested in chatting to you, Tom, for a reason, a very simple reason. I'm not a private jet guy this morning, so I'm using this as a learning experience with you. If I ask daft questions, all part of the job. What are the regions, or are there certain regions or routes that are seeing the biggest spike in bookings at the moment?
Yeah, I think Muscat in Oman has been kind of one of the hubs for departures because it's relatively easy for people in the region to get there.
Right.
We've had a lot of departures from Saudi Arabia, again, relatively easy to get there. There's aircraft in the region, so we can activate quite quickly. Now, what we did when this situation started to develop a couple of weeks ago, we had several key partners from our side and said, right, what's your availability with your aircraft? What is a sensible lead time? Let's identify the key hubs we can depart from. So then we can give really clear information to people because we're having a huge surge in demand. So it's really important we can give clear facts to people. And as you've probably seen, Tim, there's a lot of information flying around, which a lot of misinformation, let's say, about airspace closing or airports reopening and opening. So it is essential that we're dealing with facts and we have a really clear plan that's tried and tested. So we can say, right, the best option for you will be to depart from this airport at this time. It's going to take 36 hours. So it's definitely been a dynamic situation and just one we have to really manage carefully because it is quite dynamic. There's a lot of operational variables for all airlines that we need to take into consideration and make sure we can ultimately deliver the flight. But as always, safety is the number one priority. So no airline, whether that's private or commercial, is going to be operating if they think it's at that time not safe to do so.
For sure. The term air corridor is becoming part of the vernacular. It's pretty familiar to all of us, certainly over the last couple of weeks. And I guess traditional routes from this region aren't available, but there are options, still around, aren't there? I've been reading about the northern route and the southern route. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of the air corridors, obviously with airspace restrictions, airlines are kind of temporarily moving their flights around if they're operating from the Far East to Europe or to the US, for example. So they have kind of been the key areas. And as I've said, we've seen a lot of demand for Muscat Airport, and it's not a huge busy airport really in comparative to some of the airports in the region. So they've had a huge level of demand come from them, and it's they've managed it very well, but albeit it's been relatively overwhelmed at times when we've had multiple flights going from there at the same time.
How quickly can the private aviation sector scale up when, something like the geopolitical events, the tensions that we've seen disrupt commercial travel?
It can be relatively quick, and that is kind of where private aviation comes into its own. It can scale relatively quickly. Now, that said, the key for us as a charter broker has been to identify reliable charter operators in the region who are able to operate it, know who we can go to, know what the capacity is, and know roughly what kind of pricing we're looking at and how quickly we can activate a flight. So it definitely it adds a level of flexibility with private aviation. But that said, we still do have operational obstacles that we need to manage carefully. And there might be impacts, for example, where we need to position an aircraft from Europe, like you say, which could be, 5, 6 hours potentially, and then have all the permits in place to take off. So we still have to be very mindful of that, and we're being very candid with clients, because I think there might be, people thinking with private aviation, right, I pay this amount of money, the plane's there, waiting to go, and we're off. And of course, there's probably a shorter lead time if you're compared to booking schedule at the moment, but it's really important to bear that in mind, because if you pay, it's a big financial outlay. And if you're paying a lot of money for this, it can't be guaranteed 100% that your plane's going to take off when it's stated, because if there's an airspace closure or temporary restrictions, these still have to be managed. Because as I said, safety is the number one priority.
It's not what we see on TV, just, fuel the jet, I'll be there in half an hour, is it?
Exactly right. And I think that's where we have to be very candid with clients, because I think sometimes, especially, we're seeing people who might not necessarily have chartered an aircraft before, and that might be what they think it's like. So having that key, clear information up front is vital, because the last thing you want to do is overpromise and underdeliver in any job, right? So we have to be very candid and say, look, realistically, this is the lead time we're looking at. We will let you know if there's an opportunity to expedite that and get you out sooner, but plan for this. It gives you enough time to be where you need to be, and us to make sure all the operational side with the airline are in place for you.
You mentioned, Tom, you've seen an uptick in corporate clients, utilizing the private jet charter service. But who else are we seeing using it? Is it government movements? Is it high net worth, leisure travelers driving demand as well?
Yeah, it's kind of all of the above, Tim, to be honest. I mean, the majority of work we've done have been kind of European corporations who are looking just to temporarily move their workforce around so they can continue doing what they're doing. Obviously, there's a duty of care there, but we're seeing high net worth individuals who are in the region. We're getting a lot of requests from people who might be living here. And as I say, they just want to know what that kind of plan would be. Embassies, people like this, just again, knowing what that plan is. But to be fair to the scheduled service airlines, they've been very resilient, and the amount of departures they're doing now, there's been a huge kind of uptick in that. So we are seeing a lot of the traffic going on scheduled flights. And I would say from the charter side, touch wood, I think we're through kind of the peak of the demand. I'd say that kind of fell probably this time last week, to be honest, where there was a huge amount of demand for people understanding what their options would be. Yeah. But I think at this time, we're probably through the thick of that.
Okay. I mean, logistically, if we could dig into that for a moment, it must be a really complex time to book a charter flight at a time like now, when, airspace is restricted, corridors are positioned in certain ways, war risk premiums have to be, I would imagine, shifting constantly. What kinds of logistical challenges come with handling, a sudden, the uptick in requests that you've seen, or certainly saw in that first kind of week, if you like?
I think, Tim, the most tricky part is the level of demand with the level of supply, especially, like you say, in the first week, because not all charter airlines, were operating in the region. So we identified key partners, and there was so much demand and people inquiring. This is why we had to be really clear with them and say, look, this is the lead time, 36, 48 hours. If we kind of sit on this, the lead time may increase more because there's so much demand. So definitely kind of balancing the supply with the demand has been tricky. And like you say, there has been an increase in pricing naturally, because there are additional costs for the airlines, whether that's lengthy possessioning sectors from Europe, whether that's increased insurance premium, war risk insurance, these sorts of things. So again, kind of explaining to people, look, prices are at a slight premium. It is a significant financial outlay, and there are operational factors we must consider, because it might not just be as smooth as you think straight away. We have to manage that and be very transparent with you.
Look, I've seen, I guess we've all seen these massive figures that are bandied around. I've no idea how accurate the reporting is, but I've seen $60,000, $85,000 banded around for international routes. I've heard of increases of 100%, up to 200% in some cases. There's loads of social media content around of, people posting from jets, quoting all kinds of figures. Really and truly, how have prices for private charters increased due to demand and, limited aircraft availability as well?
So we looked at this based on the flights we did, and we've seen roughly a 20% increase in the charter rates from what it would be kind of in normal circumstances. And again, that is typically due to the insurance premiums.
Right.
Again, I've seen the same kind of information, and there's a lot of misinformation around this. This is why we have to be really clear. And the prices, it depends on the operator as well, but the prices can be widespread, but it really depends on how many passengers you've got, the aircraft and airline you're using, and sort of lead time. All these things kind of come into what the price will be.
Okay. What about the impacts of oil prices? Has there been an impact so far?
Yeah, definitely. I think
Right.
the price of Jet A1 has significantly increased due to the situation. Now, this is something, if we've got clients flying maybe, in a few weeks' time, then would they need to be mindful of it? It's a knock-on effect from the current situation. So the prices are increasing, which ultimately has a knock-on effect on the charter rates moving forward, however long that will be for.
We're in uncharted territory. I excuse the puns this morning; they're just coming out thick and fast, unfortunately. But what if? Can I run a scenario by you? What if airspace closes while a private jet charter is taxiing, or maybe in flight? If say an alert is received, for example, how does it work in terms of diversion refund policy? If our clients billed for the full charter, or is it just flight hours logged? How does that come together?
It's a really good question. Again, something we're being very transparent with clients on, because if the aircraft's position and things like this, then ultimately they may be liable for a cancellation fee because the airline has incurred costs. So we have to be very transparent about that.
Mm.
Now, we've had a very similar situation where we had a flight due to depart and the airspace closed. It was only for about 10, 15 minutes. And the operator, as soon as they were able to do so, and it was safe to do so, they could replan the flight. And I think there was around an hour delay, something like that. So the airlines that we're working with are being very flexible when there needs to be. But to answer your question, yes, it really depends on the operator and the terms that they provide for the charter. But if the aircraft has positioned and costs have been incurred, then clients can expect cancellation fees to be levied from the operator side.
Yeah, it's a pretty extraordinary period of time, of course, as well, to be fair. Do you think events like this tend to create lasting changes in travel habits? Is that a knock-on effect, if you like, particularly among, this kind of premium traveller segment?
It's a really good question, and I think the closest comparison from my experience has been COVID, because we saw in COVID a lot of people turn to private aviation, and I think some people they experienced that for the first time. Think actually we're going to do this more often. I'd say, from my opinion, probably in the short term, maybe, and I think if people have tried it, then they might be more willing to consider that as an option moving forward. But I do think probably in the short term, yes, but longer term, these things have a habit of kind of balancing themselves out.
Okay, a couple of just very quick final questions for you. Well, what should travellers considering private charter know? What's really important before taking the plunge, if you like, about availability, planning timelines and costs, particularly when you consider the backdrop, the disruption that we've seen.
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously only fly if it's the best option for you and your circumstances. And speaking with a reputable company, understanding what the best departure point may be, whether that might be Muscat, for example, or Riyadh at the current circumstances, ensuring that if you are going overland, you've got the relevant visas and permissions to do so, and having a real clear understanding of when do you need to be departing, because it could be 24 hours, for example, if we've got an aircraft in position, or it could be 48 hours. So having a clear understanding of what the timelines would be, understanding obviously this is a significant financial outlay for most people. So understanding that there are potential risks around cancellation, there might be items to consider around permits, all of these things. So having a real clear understanding of what the cost is, what the variables might be, and having a very clear plan in place.
Final question for you, and I you've mentioned COVID, which I guess, and with a lot of the people that we've spoken to over the last couple of weeks, and that period is also has almost become like a test case almost for the situation that we see ourselves in now. And there were lots of lessons, I think, learned from that. You've referred to the time a couple of times as being dynamic. From that, I take really unusual, quite hectic, and this has been a trying time, I suppose, in some ways. But how resilient is the private aviation sector when global travel is under such a volatile kind of umbrella. It's almost the new normal. I know that's a stretch, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, I completely understand. And look, I've done this job for over 10 years, and I think the key thing is there's always been something, right? Whether it's geopolitical issues or whether it's COVID. I would say, of course, that private aviation, it is relatively sensitive to geopolitical situations, but it has naturally always kind of bounced back and been relatively resilient because like I say, these can be corporations flying, and these can be sports teams, high net worth individuals, governments as well. So we can expect obviously some volatility short term. Not every couple of weeks in private aviation is like this, just to be clear. Yeah, I'd say kind of naturally it is very sensitive to what's going on in the world and oil prices, all of these things, because that will have a knock-on effect with pricing. And some people might say, well, I was looking at flying from the Middle East to the Bahamas for my holiday this year. Maybe I'll fly on a scheduled flight. So it is sensitive, but as I say, from my experience, the private aviation industry has always bounced back strongly, and it has been very resilient.
It's amazing how interconnected we are as a world now, and the knock-on effect from so many different events impact us in so many different ways. Been really interested to talk to you, Tom. I feel like I know a little bit more about private jet charter now, so I appreciate it. Tom Hill, Director of Group Charter Global at the private jet charter provider Flyvictor, with us this morning. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for your time.
Appreciate it. This is Mirror Business FM.